I do make his job harder. I do agree with that. I think that's true. He's a very straight shooter. Social media, for me, has been very important because it gives me a voice, because I don't get that voice in the press.
President Trump right there addressing comments related to his Attorney General William Barr that the president's tweets, quote unquote, make it impossible for me to do my job. Meanwhile, the Justice Department is pushing back on reports that Barr is planning to resign, or at least threatening to resign, over those tweets. Joining us now is White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley. Hogan, thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the time.
So has the Attorney General privately expressed his displeasure and threatened that he may resign if these tweets continue?
The Department of Justice actually put a statement out about this yesterday, saying that the Attorney General has no intention to quit, no intention to resign whatsoever. The President has also been clear. They have a good working relationship. He expects Attorney General Barr to execute justice in all matters. He knows he's doing that. And the relationship will continue, and Attorney General Barr has been doing an incredible job so far. The President's been clear about that on many occasions.
But Hogan, you and I both know that, no plans to resign doesn't mean you might not eventually resign. The Washington Post, which kicked this off last night, said Barr has been persistently vexed by Trump's tweets, and he saw the president's commentary on Roger Stone last week as something of a last straw. So beyond the Washington game of whether he's going to resign or not, the Attorney General, between these private signals in the leaks and, more importantly, his public comments last week to ABC News, has said, look, this is making my job difficult. Don't tweet about these criminal matters. The president seems to be ignoring that. Why?
It's not true. The president even pointed out the fact that his tweets maybe do make the Attorney General's life a little more difficult. That was clear yesterday. But listen, the Washington games you're talking about are clearly on display here. We don't have to wonder what's going on in private. We've seen this play out in public. The Attorney General has made his feelings known about the president's tweets. The president has also made his feelings known about the Attorney General and his right to comment. Listen, everyone in this country has the First Amendment right to say what they want to say to defend themselves. This president has used social media on many occasions to defend himself. Hogan, he also made the point he wouldn't be in the Oval Office. He wouldn't be in the White House had it not been for his ability to speak directly to the American people without the filter of the mainstream media.
So what you're saying is the president's own Attorney General has said publicly and privately, I don't want to see these tweets. And you're saying the president's got the final word and is going to ignore the man he nominated.
Well, I don't know what their private conversations are. I'm not privy to those, but I'm just telling you what they've talked about in private seems to be playing out pretty well in public. They've both made their opinions well known. I'm not saying that the president is ignoring the Attorney General. What I'm saying, though, is the president has the right to defend himself just like any other American citizen. He's done it before, and I'm sure he'll do it again.
I just want to ask you about one particular tweet. It was last week. It was a late-night tweet by the president in which he criticized a federal prosecutor after an earlier recommendation that Roger Stone should be sentenced to 7 to 9 years in prison. Now, we just heard about 11 different convicts that were either commuted or pardoned, their sentences. So the president is obviously putting it out there, what he intends to do with his friend Roger Stone. Does that irk Bill Barr?
Well, I wouldn't say he's putting it out there what he intends to do with Roger Stone. In fact, he said he'd made no thought about that one way or the other yesterday under the wing of Air Force One. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of Attorney General Barr whether he's irked about that or not. Again, the president has the right to make his opinions known, and the Department of Justice even put out a statement during that case you're talking about, in which they said they were told a much lower sentence was coming out for Roger Stone, and then one that was recommended was much higher than what they were told privately. So that's an issue that they're going to have to answer for. But the fact is, the president is clearly against excessive sentencing. Whether it's Rod Blagojevich or Alice Johnson, he is focused on making sure people who serve time in prison, who have rehabilitated, who show regret and show remorse, don't have to rot away in a jail cell their whole life. These are non-violent offenders. He has the right to do that. He looks at all of these cases specifically on the merits and the details, and then makes those decisions, just like every president in the past has done.
And Hogan, you're right. The president has a First Amendment right, as we all do, to speak out on different cases, different matters. He does that on social media and before the TV cameras all the time. He also, as you know, has the absolute power, executive power, to pardon, as Julie just teed up. But Democrats are furious about some of these pardons and commutations. Here's Chris Van Hollen. We'll give you a fair chance to respond.
Okay.
President Trump, despite what he said during the campaign, is now the ultimate swamp monster. He's using the power of his office to help other people who were convicted of political corruption charges, to help very wealthy and powerful people, and he's using the Justice Department to reward his friends and punish his enemies. That's what banana republics do.
The president's no fan of Chris Van Hollen. He's said that before. Your response?
Well, first of all, I'm not going to take lessons on draining the swamp from someone who's been in public office for 20 years in Washington, D.C. Second of all, it's kind of funny that most of the Democrats are talking about decriminalizing anyone who commits a crime that's nonviolent. So for them to be somehow concerned that someone served 8 years in the case of Rod Blagojevich is kind of rich, to say the least. But lastly, I'll make this point. 11 people were either pardoned or granted commutations yesterday. And what's interesting about that, we're only really talking about one. The media is fixated on Rod Blagojevich, but no one's talking about Crystal Munoz, for example, someone who served 12 years in prison for a nonviolent drug offense. I was in the Oval Office yesterday. The president demanded that he get to speak to Crystal's husband and talk to Ricky directly. They had no idea this commutation was coming. They had no idea she was going to be set free. And that emotional moment between the President of the United States and that citizen who thought, quite frankly, it was a joke, didn't even believe it was President Trump on the other line. But the President told him, your wife's going to be set free. She served enough time for that sentence. These excessive sentences have to stop. It was a very emotional moment. Ricky was extremely appreciative, and they were ready to get their life started. In fact, he just left his wife in prison that day. So those are the types of things that affect real Americans that the media don't want to talk about because they rather fixate and focus on the high-powered folks that they deem somehow more nefarious than the others. But the president looks at all these cases, as I said, individually, and whether they're someone who's well-connected, well-financed, or someone that the media and the American people have never heard of. The president does not like excessive sentencing, and he's going to right those wrongs any chance he gets.
Right. Well, you know, and everyone is talking about Blagojevich because obviously he was probably one of the most noted and a face that we all remember. Then the dark brown, thick, lustrous hair, now silver. But he did actually talk to cameras, so he's already out there. And apparently he was also signing autographs as well. But let's play Blagojevich last night.
I want to express my most profound and everlasting gratitude to President Trump. He didn't have to do this. He's a Republican president. I was a Democratic governor. He's got obviously a big fan in me. And if you're asking me what my party affiliation is, I'm a Trumpocrat.
He's a Trumpocrat. Your thoughts?
Well, I like the terminology for sure. But listen, that's what the president's all about here. It doesn't matter party. It doesn't matter what socioeconomic status that you find yourself in. He wants to right the wrongs of a criminal justice system that may or may not have done the right thing. And there's a lot of people in prison right now with these excessive sentences. Mm-hmm. He wants to try and get those folks out of prison who served their time, paid their debt to society. And that the Crystal Munoz is one I mentioned. There's another one, a young woman named Judith Negron, I believe is her last name. Mm-hmm. She also served some time in jail, who's been let out. No one knows who that is either. But we appreciate the thanks and the gratitude. But that's not what the president, it's not why the president does this. He does this because he wants to right wrongs that these people have faced injustices, and he wants to fix that wherever he can, and he's done that.
And as you noted, he signed in a lot of the major criminal justice reform that was supported on both sides of the aisle. Hogan Gidley, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks, Hogan.